Anthony and the NHS by Mark Spruce. Written in 2011.
Where to start? A strange day indeed, and it could be entered at any number of places, and a story be taken back and forth from there. Anthony, ambulance, A&E, or just crushed cardboard. Well, I suppose crushed cardboard is the natural place to start, as it is closest to the start of the day. My partner and I were about to take a first trip to the council tip with a large pile of cardboard packing boxes, now free of their contents and clogging up the garage. It was hardly a heavy task to load them into the boots of 2 cars, but for my heart at that moment in time, it was apparently too much. Just as I had finished loading the cars and was standing in the hallway whilst my partner got her boys ready upstairs, I suddenly felt incredibly giddy and nauseous. Not feeling too good," I called weakly up the stairs. I sort of stumbled into the lounge as she came in behind me and got me to sit down on the sofa. Apparently I had turned grey. My whole left side felt numb from the top of my head to the tips of my toes. I was struggling for breath and just felt an incredible urge to close my eyes. I vaguely remember half a conversation between my partner and somebody who had responded to her 999 call, but it was all I could do just to sit there with my legs up and concentrate on breathing. The next thing I knew, the paramedics had arrived. 2 green professional angels, 1 male and 1 female, some relaxed chat, some astute questioning, and my first bloodletting of the day. "Just a scratch, it might sting a bit." Well, it did, and I gritted my teeth, especially when the first vein sank away and the needle was sunk into the other arm instead. As the blood flow returned to my brain, I started to feel a little bit more normal and to respond to the calm, confident banter of my 2 green heroes. Shortly afterwards, I was being wheeled in a chair out of the front drive and into the back of an ambulance parked at the end of the drive. I was laid down in the back of the ambulance, wired up to various monitors. The male paramedic asked me various questions, the responses to which he entered in a neat little laptop, whilst his female colleague drove us the 8 miles or so to the Queen's Medical Centre. As I sat up in the back of the ambulance, looking out the darkened window at the passing traffic, I tried to take in this new experience. For years on the road, as an ambulance had sped past, I had often wondered what trauma was going on inside. Now it was me on the inside, and it all seemed remarkably serene. We arrived at the A&E entrance to QMC, and as the ambulance rear doors opened, there was my good friend Andrew waiting to greet me. I should have mentioned my partner had phoned him straight after she had called the ambulance, and he had got down there very quickly to offer a bit of moral support. He had then gone on ahead of the ambulance to be there waiting at QMC. What a good mate. I entered the ominous portals of A&E on a wheeled chair, taken past admissions and into a corridor where I'm transferred to a trolley, one of 4 patients waiting with their attendant paramedics to enter A&E proper. The time was now approximately 11:30 in the morning, and I never suspected at this point that this trolley was to be my home for the next 6 hours. The 2 trolley patients ahead of me were silent, but the wizened and shrunken lady brought in behind me just moaned intermittently and with a painful howl of incomprehension and fear. After 20 minutes or so, we were taken into the main A&E area. Curtained cubicles lined 3 sides of a large room. On the 4th side was the command centre desk, behind which various medical staff came and went, gazing briefly at screens, exchanging information, and then moving to various patients within the room and taking them to their next destination. As I came in the room, I could see 4 lines of trolleys, each containing a patient. The lines went back 5 deep. It was apparent that most of the cubicles were also full, and on occasions a patient would vacate a cubicle and one from the centre would be wheeled in. With Andrew alongside me, I was wheeled in past the ranks of waiting trolleys to join the back of the grid. A motor racing grid is what the whole setup most closely resembled, and I was a long, long way back from pole position. People of various ages, sexes and injuries were crowded around me as we sat or lay there watching the action unfold. As Andrew and I chatted calmly to pass the time, one character of particular note was wheeled in and parked slightly forward and to my right. From what I could see, he was in his late 30s and wore a scruffy t-shirt, a dark jacket and what appeared to be a pair of cut-off pinstripe trousers. His bare lower legs were covered in bruises, and his feet were shod in a scruffy pair of trainers. He appeared to be conducting an ongoing conversation with himself, and from where I sat, I could see his shaking left hand picking absently at his trouser legs, more or less continuously, as though trying to remove some imagined stain or thread end. The man's behaviour seemed to make all those around, those that were aware of their surroundings at least, rather apprehensive, myself included. Occasionally he would scratch his thick mat of unkempt dark brown hair and attempt to leave his trolley. Thankfully he had come in with a couple of friends who managed to get him to remain where he was every time he attempted to leave. Eventually I caught that his name was Anthony, and secretly hoped that Anthony might be dealt with speedily and removed from our presence. After hours of interesting chat between Andrew and myself, followed by my first trip to a side cubicle, Anthony was finally sent on his way to God knows where about 3 p.m. I think many people sighed a little sigh of relief as he was wheeled away. The rest of the afternoon passed fairly peaceably. I was monitored and tested for various things, and yet more holes were punctured into my skin and more blood samples were removed. On my second trip to a side cubicle, I was told by the doctor I would be kept in overnight as further blood tests would need to be taken at 10 p.m, approximately 12 hours after the incident had first occurred. The presence of an enzyme in the blood apparently would indicate if I had indeed suffered a heart attack that morning. In the meantime, whilst waiting for a bed to become available on B3 ward, I was asked if I minded waiting on my trolley back out on the grid, so that my cubicle could be used for further incoming patients. Oh well, why not? Meanwhile, Andrew stoically stayed with me and kept me company throughout the afternoon. We both ended up having a long and entertaining chat with the A&E security guard. Topics ranged from children's TV of the 60s, a theme common to all of us, to the guard's duties on suicide watch with various patients. Gruesome, I know, but it did make the time pass a little quicker. At around 5:30, Andrew had gone off for a coffee when I was approached by a male nurse and told I would now be finally going up to the ward. Sorry about the delay. Well, 6 hours is quite some delay, and to be honest, my backside was getting very numb, but all the staff I had encountered had been so friendly, there really was no one to direct any kind of blame or frustration at. I guess it is just a greatly overloaded system. As I was taken up in the lift to B floor by the orderly, I was feeling relieved and grateful to finally be out of A&E. Hopefully I would be on a side ward and I could get a little peace and a sandwich and hopefully some sleep. The doors of B3 ward opened and I was wheeled along a corridor past various 6-berth open wards until my allotted bed was reached. There were 3 beds along one wall with the centre one vacant and patients in the other 2. Facing these were a further 3 occupied beds. In those first few seconds, I did not really take in 4 of my newly ailing bedfellows. My sight was fixed on the patient to my left. My heart sank as I looked on the twitching, babbling form of Anthony lying on my adjoining bed. Oh God, what did I do to deserve this? I climbed reluctantly onto my bed and lay there feeling exposed and quite suddenly depressed. Oh well, just got to tough this one out, I thought to myself, giving the briefest of nods to the patient opposite and to my left. I quickly discovered his name was also Mark, a middle-aged, much tattooed divorcee and father of a child who might be mine, I never found out. This information I picked up as he passed it to the bedfellow to my left, Amjid, a nervous and very small Asian man in a bright purple shirt and dark trousers. To Mark's left and directly opposite me was Lester, an 89-year-old on a ventilator whose wife apparently had Alzheimer's and was in a nursing home locally. To his right was a portly chap in an open cotton shirt and stained white vest, whose name I did not catch. What I could not avoid catching from him, though, was the harshest, hacking sound of lung-clogged coughing that I had ever heard in my life. These were followed by the sounds of him spitting up whatever it was he had managed to retch up from his lungs into a cardboard bowl. Then, of course, to my right was dear Anthony, babbling away loudly to himself about he had never touched her, he had slept on the couch, and the police could prove nothing. Every few minutes he would get off his bed and walk across the ward or off down the corridor to be brought back quickly by a nurse, whilst he explained in a way that was apparently rational to him as to why he needed to visit various cupboards and beds around the ward. This was going to be a very long night. Thankfully, when the doctor came to first talk to me, he drew the curtains around my bed, and I was at least hidden from the sight of my temporary neighbours, if not the sound. Meanwhile, Lester breathed heavily, Coughing Man coughed loudly, and Anthony continued to gabble repeatedly and get out of his bed. Shrinking behind my curtain, I felt that I had entered Bedlam and wanted nothing more than to escape. My partner came to visit around 7:30, and for half an hour there was the briefest of respites and some sane, if hushed, conversations. All too soon she had to leave. We said our goodbyes, and as she left the ward, I heard Amjid to my left say to the doctor, "It's okay, I've not heard the voices for over a week." For God's sake, what was I doing here, lying between two patients who both seemed to have imaginary friends? Perhaps I should swap places with one of them, and their imaginary friends could be introduced to each other. Sometime around 11 p.m. the lights were turned down in the ward, and I lay there in the semi-darkness, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the hospital, and feeling like I had now been a long, long time in another, much less friendly world. The morning's events that had led me here seemed so far removed from where I was at that moment. I just wanted sleep to overtake me so that I could get through to the morning and escape to normality. By 2 a.m. I was still awake. Amjid snored loudly to my left, and to my right I could hear Anthony, bloody Anthony, being taken back to his bed every few minutes by an increasingly frustrated male nurse. "Now, back to bed, Anthony. Anthony, get back to bed. Anthony, I mean it, this is your last warning," etc., etc. I could feel my head spinning and my blood pressure rising. I was so very, very tired and wanted nothing more than to fall asleep. That, though, is something very hard to do in Bedlam. Eventually and inevitably I snapped in a Basil Fawlty in the broken down car kind of way. I got out of bed, walked to the end of Anthony's bed as the male nurse approached me. Pointing towards Anthony with a shaking hand, I hissed at the nurse through clenched teeth. "I have listened to that effing fruitcake now for 8 effing hours. Either move him or move me, or I will rip his effing head off. Do you understand?" I was quite cross at this point. What am I saying? I was insanely angry, quite possibly the angriest I'd felt in many years. The proverbial red mist descended on me, and at that moment I was putting my injured heart under considerable stress. I did not care. I had snapped, and just at that moment I could have committed murder. Thankfully, the saintly nurse recognised I was about to explode and led me to a waiting room at the end of the ward. The room only had a hard bench seat along the back wall and contained nothing else except a low and scratched laminate table. The room was bathed in harsh sodium light, but it was quiet and it was sanctuary. I laid down on the blue plastic seating. The nurse switched off the light and I fell asleep in seconds. By 5 o'clock I was awake again and had stumbled blearily back to my bed on the main ward. As I passed Anthony, I noticed he was sleeping heavily at last, and I was momentarily torn between gratitude that he was finally silenced and the childish desire for revenge in some form of a good thumping. Thankfully, I decided on the adult approach and left him asleep. By 9 a.m, the cardiac consultant was on his rounds, and my curtained bed space was filled with 5 different medical staff. The upshot of various discussions was that probably my dose of beta blockers was too high, as my heartbeat had dropped to 45 beats per minute, and this is what had probably caused me to nearly collapse the previous morning after a heavy session of cardboard lifting. By 10 a.m, I was off the ward at last, and good mate Andrew was there to pick me up and whisk me back to sanity. If ever there was an incentive to try and remain healthy, it was the experience of that night in hospital. Before I left, beyond the curtain, I heard a reasonably coherent and sober Anthony explain to the consultant how he did not really want to stop drinking, and that these bouts of the DTs only happened when he ran out of money. Oh, and did I mention he was Australian? In the end, I have to say that Kylie is a much better ambassador for Anglo-Aussie relations than Anthony.
Spruce Casts, an eclectic collection of anecdotes, reflections and stories by Mark Spruce.